Right, without any further ado, tonight's speaker is Mr. Ewan Leeming, who is perhaps the most imperturbable of the Edinburgh Skeptics. I also happen to know that he's into his maths, he's into his rally driving, and lambing. Is that where you like pull the testicles off a baby lamb?
No.
It isn't? Okay, I've got a seriously skewed view of farming.
Yes.
Doesn't
surprise me.
But he looks like the kind of guy who can pull the testicles off a newborn lamb without remorse or pity. So
That's not very nice.
All I'm saying is just bear it in mind when it comes
I'm meant to be one of the good guys here.
Well, just bear it in mind when it comes to donations, okay? Anyway, tonight he is going to be talking about the end of the world, as it says on the tin. So you've seen enough of me. Over to the imperturbable Mr. Ewan Leeming.
I don't know what imperturbable, what he said means either. Good evening, my name is Ewan Leeming. If you don't know me, I'm going to be talking about the Mayan calendar and the end of the world. I'm not a fan of technology that much, so I've got my redneck laser pointer with me, pointing things out as well. We're seeing a lot of things in the news and in films and books and that recently about this theory that the world's going to end in December and we're all going to die and it's going to be nasty and that. And a couple of days ago, my attention was brought to this by the fantastic website, which you can't quite see there, called the 21st Floor, well worth a look. And it's about this place in Australia that is selling basically bunks in this in a bunker for $5,000 so that you can survive when the world ends in December. Now, I have to say, I think that if I did survive the end of the world in December in a vault in Australia, I'd probably miss my friends quite a bit, so I'm not entirely certain it would be worth it. And also, I've played Fallout 3. I know what happens if you're in a vault underneath the ground when the world ends. I don't really fancy that either. So it's obviously people are making money at this, so it's quite serious. So I'm going to have a look at that tonight. And I'm going to have a look at other things as well. So that's what I was saying. The Mayan calendar supposedly predicts the end of the world in December. I've looked into these claims and the supporting evidence for them, and then I hit a problem because I then had to go and find a lot more to fill up 50-minute talk. That will become apparent as we go through. Warning, I'm losing the bottom, doesn't matter. Contains scenes of ignorance, stupidity, and Machiavellian ruthlessness. Yeah, no, it's good. So, the talk contains, first of all, a bit about calendars, why we have them, how they started, that sort of thing. Then we've got to look at some different calendars throughout history, because we've not always used the one we've got at the moment. Short interlude showing the difference between maths and numerology, which I think you'll like. Hopefully the tech will work for that one, so fingers crossed for that. A bit about the Mayans, a bit about this long count calendar, which is the one that's causing all the brouhaha and that sort of thing. And then we've got the conclusion at the end. Damn it, that was meant to be struck through like I scored it out. So, before we start, a wee bit of maths. There is bits of maths in this talk. I'm a mathematician by trade, if not by practice, so it is understandable. I'll try and keep it relatively simple for the civilians in the audience. Try not to worry too much. Basically, two numbers are relatively prime. This is one concept I'll be mentioning a lot, so I'll just explain it now. Two numbers are relatively prime if they don't appear in the same times table, basically. So 7 and 9 don't appear in the same times table. Yes, I know, Julia, this isn't a proper explanation. 30 and 365 both appear in the 5 times table. You can divide them both by 5, so they're not relatively prime. And basically, the reason I'll be talking about this is if you try and start a calendar based on 2 cycles of numbers that are relatively prime, so they don't match up anywhere, you get yourself in a lot of trouble. As has been found by anybody who's ever invented a calendar in all of history, because it's virtually impossible to avoid, and they all get messed up. So I started my research by doing what they call a literature review, where you go through what's already been said about calendars, and I started with every academic's favourite source, Wikipedia. So this is what Wikipedia says about calendars. system of organising days for various purposes, and you give names to various lengths of time as well. And it all matches up, basically so you can tell what day it is. I then looked at dictionary.com, saying much the same thing. I thought, this is fine, it's not really helping me much though. So I looked at possibly the most underused academic resource on the planet, Urban Dictionary. Calendar is a thing where you write down what you have to go do, like go shopping, or if you're going to a pub or something. I thought that was good. And then an academic resource that if you're a geek like myself, which I am, if you use a lot, is this one. It says, allows workers to construct plantations or many workers' resources which are extremely important for growth and happiness. That's from Civilopedia, off of the Civilization game. Probably the reference that I use most in everyday life. So, the first calendars, actually the last one there from Civilization, it does sum it up quite well, because the first calendars were designed to tell you when to plant things. And what part of the year was coming next, sort of thing. So we started off by keeping track of the seasons, and also when you're keeping track of the seasons, you want to know when the weather's going to start getting warmer, when it's going to start getting colder, when the rains are going to come, this sort of thing. And the easiest way to do that is something like Stonehenge. When you've got a large monument like Stonehenge, when the sun winds up in a particular way, or the moon winds up in a particular way, you know you're so far through the year. And the days are going to start getting longer, or the days are going to start getting shorter, or it's time to start harvesting things, or something like that. So that's really the first one. As I say, helps you know when to plant crops. So here we've got Stonehenge as it possibly looked originally. You can see you've got this outer circle here, and then 5 stones in the middle, and it was aligned so that sunrise on the midsummer's morning we'd come in and hit there's a stone just off picture to the left there, just next to the main road, and the sun, we would line up with that stone there, and then come through, called the heel stone, and then line up with the gap that you just can't see there. So it's an early form of computer, almost. Single core processor. 32 megaliths of RAM. So that would be ROM, wouldn't it? Yeah. And it's really quite clever. I'm not going to go into it just now, but there's some early stone circles like this. If you could keep them standing long enough, you could get all kinds of observations of them. And they were sometimes used to predict eclipses, things like that. And depending on which scholar you believe, they can also be used to prove that people back then knew that the Earth was round, because some of the maths that you can supposedly do with them works only if you assume that the Earth's spherical. So it's they're a lot more complicated than the first look. They measure what we call the tropical year, which is the time it takes for the Earth to go from one equinox or solstice right round to the same one again. So it's basically going through the seasons. And it is just over 365 days. 365 days, and then just short of 6 hours. And it changes by a few minutes every year. It's not constant, because the Earth's always getting pulled by the other planets in its orbit. So it can be maybe 4 or 5 minutes either side, which is quite staggering if you don't realise it. It's the fact that the Earth, you think it keeps going round at the same speed all the time. It doesn't really. It takes different times every year. And it's the most likely basis for many of the early calendars that were just keeping track of the seasons. We've also got something called the sidereal year, which is the Earth as it's going around in its orbit in respect to the stars. So the first one, the tropical year, is really for the Sun. The sidereal year is compared to the stars, and they're not the same length. It's slightly longer, it's about 20 minutes longer. And this means that the equinoxes don't stay at the same point of the year all the time. So at the moment, it's the stars don't stay lined up with the equinoxes the same. This really pisses off astrologers because it means that their art that goes back thousands and thousands of years is actually 20 minutes wrong every year. And that adds up and that's why it's one of the many reasons why they're completely wrong. I won't go into that just now. Years, it might surprise you to know or to find out that they weren't really that important to start with. It was more, people living day to day and season to season. They weren't really bothered about what was going to happen next year. You would start with maybe coming of age rituals, so people would become adults at a certain age. And that would be the first reason to keep track of what year. Well, it wouldn't really even be what year it was how old someone was. You wouldn't really bother about this is the year such and such. It would be this is the year where wee Johnny turned 18. Probably would be called wee Johnny, something like that. The first way of really keeping track what year it was would be looking at how long someone had been in power. So that would be for instance, for monarchies, or anything like that. For, like say, the Roman Republic, they kept track of the years after the founding of the city, semi-mythical founding of the city anyway. But in more common usage, it would be who was the prefects, consuls for that year, and that would be how they could keep track and differentiate between the different years. And of course, religious festivals like the Olympics. There we go. It's a mixed audience for that, isn't it? It's actually, the Olympics was causing me to be running late tonight because there were so many rather attractive young women that win medals. It's been a common problem this week. Sorry, I don't know why I brought that in. Anyway, the Olympics happened every 4 years back in ancient Greece, so obviously we would have to keep track of that, otherwise the gods might be displeased, and the other team would win. Months were originally linked in with the moon. That gets a wee bit messy though, because the moon takes either 27.3 days, or 29.5, or 27.2. So if you start using the orbit of the moon to keep track of your months, you soon end up in trouble. 29.5 is the most common one because that's the time from full moon to full moon, or new moon to new moon. The fact that it's 29.5 means that you generally have a month of 29 days and then a month of 30 days in lunar calendars, like the Hebrew one and the Islamic one as well. They're both lunar. It's not a whole number of days. It means that you can't really split up the year into lunar months. You end up with 12.5. So if you plan all your months by the moon, you end up at the end of the year with about a dozen or so days left over. And then you either have to add them on to the next year or add them on to the current one, and it does get a bit messy, which we will see later on. We've got 7-day week. Most of the world uses a 7-day week nowadays. It was originally Jewish, or mainly Jewish, some influence from Babylon is the reason for that. The Babylonians used like a quarter of it was from the time between the quarters of the moon, but they ended up shoving some extra days on the end, so that the new moon was the start of a new week as well. So not very precise again. The Romans then inherited it, or got it from the Jews, and then Christians took it over. The Romans actually had either an 8 or 9 day week, depending on how you count, and there was a period of time where they used a 7-day week at the same time, which would have gotten very confusing. And then the Christians took over the 7-day week, and then it kind of spread throughout Europe and then became a standard everywhere. There are various places that have tried different lengths a week. Soviet Russia had a 5-day week and then a 6-day week. Indonesia, there's an ancient Indonesian calendar, actually had 10 weeks running at once, through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 days, and you used to keep track of it depending on which particular days of which week it was on. And the Christian week, the 7-day week we use, it's an unbroken cycle, which goes back a long time. It's always been Sunday follows Saturday follows Friday and so on, all the way back, and we know this because you can keep track of what date Easter Sunday was, and that goes back as far as 311 AD. It's quite impressive. I mean, all the way through the Dark Ages, they managed to, not forget what day it was. I think if they'd had 1 week on the Edinburgh Fringe, somewhere in that length, they probably would have watched that. But they have managed to do quite well with that. So, we'll start looking at the Egyptian calendar. The earliest one that we know a fair bit about, it lasted 365 days, no leap years. It was always 365 days, and it was used to keep track of the inundation of the Nile, so that's when the Nile floods. But it moved through the calendar, so it wasn't on a fixed date, but they could work out from where it was last year to where it was going to be the next year. Obviously, when you're if you were in Egypt, that was the main thing that you had to worry about for the year: is the Nile going to flood? Because that was where they got all the fertile soil from. So they had 3 seasons. It was the inundation, season of growth, where they plant things, and then the season of harvest. So it's basically wet and then dry and dry. So it's pretty much similar to Scotland, which has got 3 seasons when it's cold and wet, windy and wet, hot and wet. Allegedly, some people talk about this thing called summer, but I can't really say I've seen it much. So they kept track of the inundation by what they called the heliacal rising of Sirius. Sirius is obviously if you don't know, it's the brightest star in the sky apart from the sun. And it always rises a couple of weeks before the Nile would start to flood. So it rose at the same time as the sun. That's just what this heliacal rising means. So when it rose exactly on sunset, and it was kind of hard to spot because obviously there's a great big sun rising at the same time, but you could work out when it was, and as soon as you knew what day that was on, it was time to head for the hills because there was a lot of water coming in a couple of weeks' time. And that was how they kept track of it. So it wasn't, as I say, it wasn't fixed in the year. The Romans kind of looked down their nose at this a bit, and they called it the Annus Vegus. Sorry, Annus Vegus. Or wandering year. Annus being, with the 2 N's, you'll note, being the Roman word for year. That's where we get words like annular, annual, that sort of thing. We'll just have a slight pause while we shuffle the audience.
And we put one more on here. Put one more on here. We can put 1 or 2 down the front.
You don't get this in every French show, by the way. I hope you're appreciative of the fact that we're letting you get comfy. Excellent, right. So the Romans called it the Annus Vegus, or wandering year. Annus being the Roman word for year, and it's a fixed number of seconds. So it's not the time for the Earth to go around the Sun once, which is what we call the year. But there's a scientific measurement called the annus. No, I'm almost there. Yeah, I said annus. Which is it's a fixed number of seconds, and that's how we calculate things like light years and that sort of thing. So strictly speaking, if we say that a star is 4 light years away, we shouldn't say that. We should say it's 4 light annuses away. It's true. It's quite handy, this Egyptian calendar, for when you're dating when things happen, because they always took note of when in the year Sirius rose at sunrise, and therefore when the Nile flooded. And as a result of that, because this year only is 365 days, it moves round 1 day every 4 years. So if you know that the rising was on a certain day, you can actually pinpoint that, even though it was thousands of years ago, to a block of 4 years. So you can actually date, if there's an inscription or something like that, you can actually date the inscription. It's quite accurate. We'll go on to the Romans now. The Romans, they looked down the nose at the Egyptians. They had the wandering year. Actually, their own one was about 100 times worse, which we'll see just now. It's mental. The early Roman, when Rome was a monarchy, so you had the 7 kings of Rome just after it was founded, they used a year that 10 months. It was about 310 days or something like that, and then that would take you from March through to December, and then there was just a lump of days, and then you start again on the 1st of March. It meant it always lined up with the sun and that sort of thing. However, not that useful if you need to do something between December and March. So they then shifted to a year based on the lunar calendar, which was 355 days, and then occasionally they would shove in another month. Now, there were some problems with this, as you can possibly imagine. The months were tied to the moon, and you'll hear things like, you'll heard about the Ides of March, when Julius Caesar was assassinated. And these were originally based on the phases of the moon. So you had the Calends on the 1st, the Nones on the 5th or the 7th, and then the Ides on the 13th or 15th, depending on what month it is. And they used to, basically, originally it was tied in, and then they kind of thought, no, this is just getting too complicated, and they abandoned that. And they used to count down to the next, these were the three major festivals, and they used to actually count down to what day it was. So instead of saying it's the 3rd of March, for instance, something like that, they would say it is 4 days before the Nones of March, something like that. Which makes it probably worked, to be fair. It's just it seems a bit long-winded for us. There's also the fact that they tended to count inclusively. So if they were counting, like say, how many fingers is it between that one and that one, they would count it as 3, whereas we would say 2. Called the fence post problem in mathematics, because you end up, if you don't count it right, you end up with not enough fence posts. The decision. That's not very good explanation. I'll come back to that in a minute. Right. The decision whether this extra month was put in was made by a guy called the Pontifex Maximus, who was kind of the head of the Roman religion, and he would decide whether they needed this extra month or not, called intercandalis, I think. And it was meant to be based on observing the sun and deciding, do we need this extra month to bring our calendar back in line with the sun? However, there's a slight problem in that, although he was head of the religion, it was a political appointment. So if you were in charge as Pontifex Maximus, and there was a guy you didn't like as consul, you would not put this extra month in, so that he wouldn't have this long term in office. If, however, it was your best mate that was in office as consul, yeah, I think we need an extra month. Basically, what happened was, by the time we got to about 46 BC, Julius Caesar was at the height of his power, and he was Pontifex Maximus. Unfortunately, due to certain of his, shall we say, policy decisions, there had been a slight amount of upheaval in the previous few years, and no one had actually put this extra month in for about 5 or 6 years. So what had happened was, the Roman year was about 100 days out of sync with the actual solar year, and things were just a bit unmanageable. So what he did was, he says, right, 45 BC is going to have an extra 3 months in it. So the year was 15 months long, each month being about 30 days or so. And then he reformed the entire calendar, so he says it's going to be 365 days, we're going to have an extra day at the end of February every 4th year, and things are going to work fine. And it was a lot better. However, he made a mistake in that he got the Pontifex Maximus to keep track of when he needed an extra year, an extra day rather. It was meant to be every 4th year. He made a pretty big mistake in that he assumed that someone that was head of a religion would have the ability to count to 4. And it turned out that they didn't, because what happened was, instead of counting 1, 2, 3, 4, hard on lads, let's put an extra day in, 1, 2, 3, 4, extra day, what they did was they counted inclusively. So they counted the year that they started with and went 1, 2, 3, 4, put an extra day in, and then they counted that as 1 again, 1, 2, 3, 4. And the result of that was, 12 years later, by the time they got to 32 BC, they were already a day out of sync with where they should have been. Now, admittedly, that's 1 day in 12 years, which is a lot better than what they had beforehand, whereas if things went really wrong, you were losing about a day every month. However, it's still not ideal. So what happened was, about 8 or 9 BC, Emperor Augustus realised what was going wrong, and he said, right, get this sorted, and they missed out 3 or 4 leap years, and then by the time we get to about 4 AD, it was back in sync again, and everything was Pushti. Or whatever the Latin for Pushti is. Couldn't find it on the internet for some reason. I'll have a quick look back here. These are the Roman months down the left hand side here. You can see very, very similar to what we use just now. Quintillus was renamed Julius after Julius Caesar, not by himself, that was after he died. And then we had Sextilis, which was originally the 6th month, was renamed to August after Emperor Augustus. Again, not by himself, that was a vote of the Senate, I believe. So the ancient the Roman monarchy, they had these 10 months, and then it got a bit blind here. Then when they were a republic, they introduced January and February to keep track of things a bit better. This is the this is the extra month here. And then they reformed the dates a bit, and then these are the months. And you see the names are identical or very similar in all the cases. This is where all our months come from. It's from the Roman calendar. One of the things I've noticed is, as you look through, the names of the months all come from Romans, the lengths of the months come from Rome, the days of the week are all from the Norse, or pagan origin anyway. The fact that we've got 60 minutes, 60 seconds, 24 hours comes from Babylonia. Basically, there's not one thing about how we measure time that comes from a Christian origin. Even the count, I mean, you've got to say, oh, but the count is AD and that sort of thing. Well, no, because Jesus was born in 5 BC, as far as we can, as best we can work out, so it's not really measuring that either. It's just an arbitrary number. So I thought that was quite interesting. Anyway, the Gregorian calendar, what we use now. Basically, the Julian calendar, it wasn't quite exact, because it was assuming that the year was 365 and a quarter days long. It's actually slightly less than that. And so it tended to lose about 3 days, or gain 3 days every 400 years. So Pope Gregory, in 1582, I forget what number it was, he said he did something very clever, is that he got some mathematicians to have a look at it, and they came up with a better system. It was 10 days out at that point, and this was quite important to him at the time because it was messing up his calculation at Easter. What was happening was, they weren't sure because it wasn't coinciding the date when the spring equinox should have been. It wasn't, and that's how you work out when Easter is. And you don't want to celebrate Easter on the wrong date because then you go to hell. So he got some lads in to have a look at it, and he took out the leap years if they ended in a 00 unless they were divisible by 400. And that takes the average length of the year to a lot closer to the actual value. So they had to change the calendars. Most Catholic countries changed straight away. The Protestant ones thought this was some kind of trick, that the Catholics were trying to steal 10 days from them, so they didn't. Sweden made a right balls up. This is fantastic, I'll show you this one. Right? Sweden basically said, right, what we're going to do is we're going to miss out the leap years from 1700 to 1740, and that'll bring us back on track, which it would have done. So they missed out the 29th of February on 1700. They then forgot to miss out the ones in 1704 and 1708. Admittedly, there was a war on. It was the Great Northern War at the time. They had other things to think about. So what they did was, by the time they got to 1712, they weren't really on the Julian or the Gregorian calendar. So they thought, well, we're close to the Julian one still, we'll go back to it. So in 1712, they had the 30th of February. That took them back a year. And then eventually they missed 11 days out in a big chunk in 1753, and it was sorted. Which they should have probably done to start with. Britain had a slightly easier time of it, really. They passed the Calendar New Style Act in 1750, also known as Lord Chesterfield's Act, after the guy that introduced it. It shifted the start of the year from March the 25th to January the 1st, but the tax year stayed at the 25th. However, Scotland had already moved the start of New Year in 1600 because we're more sensible about things. And they missed out 11 days from the Wednesday to the Thursday, so that's how the cycle stays unbroken. Because they just went straight from Wednesday to Thursday, but the numbers didn't match up. And then riots broke out because people thought that their 11 days had been stolen. Or did they? No, is the actual answer to that. What it comes from is this doesn't come out too well. But this is a painting by, I need to look at my notes for this bit because I'm rubbish at art and that sort of thing. William Hogarth. And it is it's basically, it's a parliamentary, it's about the start of an election campaign. This gentleman here, who is kissing this gentleman here who's being kissed by this lady here, is a prospective MP. This guy here who's been bored out of school is also a prospective MP for the Whig Party. And this is a riot by the Tory Party in the background. You may recognise the name. And they have this banner here, which unfortunately you can't read, but it says, "Give us back our 11 days." And if you look at this gentleman here, he's falling over because a brick has been thrown in through the window and he's knocked him out. I think these paintings are fantastic. We should have more of these paintings nowadays because there's just so much going on. There's this guy here, he's had too many oysters and he's fainted. There's these guys here are ready to launch all this furniture out the window at this lot. It's brilliant. This part of the picture over here was used as the cover for A History of Tom Jones, a found one in some of the later editions. Just as on the side, that's where I recognised it first. Yeah, I think that's a great painting. Anyway, this isn't getting on done. The French Revolution, they started their own calendar. They thought, nah, let's draw a line through everything that's happened up to now and start fresh. There was a lot of it going about in those days. So they had 12 months of 30 days and then 5 or 6 celebration days to bring it up to the right number of days. They had a 10-day week. These were the names of the months. You may recognise one of them, Thermidor, which is the one we're in now. That has kind of carried on its existence as the name of a dish at posh middle class dinner parties. Just before the fruit bowl comes out. And a lot of these names of months are dependent on something that happens in them, and it's just really bad dog Latin basically. I think Nivos is snow, something like that, Puvo's rain and that sort of thing. So there was this dangerous new calendar system erupting on the continent. What happened in Britain? Well, we had to look at it and thought, how can we fight this? What's our best weapon as Brits? Satire. So we decided to start calling the to call them these names instead. I like that. Over there they're killing their king and butchering the aristocracy wholesale, and we just take the piss of it. It's great. So we are. Oh yeah, and they decimalised time as well, but that didn't catch on very well because it just made things far too complicated. 10 hours, 100 minutes, 100 seconds every day. So I said we are currently in Thermidor. Here is a calendar for Thermidor, 3rd year after the revolution. I'd like to point out some things to you. This is, I think this is actually, it says the 8th here, but this is where we would be. It would be the first day of the 33rd week, which is quite good because that was, they named all the days after plants and animals and that sort of thing. This would actually be the day of the thistle, the 331st of the year. Now, you can see the decimalised time here, and you can see an important, I'll just stand to the side so that the left hand side can see what I'm talking about. You can see on this side of the calendar one of the most important things about any revolution, and that is if you want to sell a new idea to people, you use scantily clad young women. This is still maintains today, still carries on today. Let's have a closer look at this one. First of all, can I just say this swan is a lad, because the last time I tried that I got slapped. But I feel I can get away with showing this picture. I know that there's a kind of woo in the audience in various places. First of all, tomorrow night's talk is of penis size. So I suspect there's going to be a certain amount of equal time coming in there. Secondly, I'm not in a lift. And thirdly, the punchline is definitely worth it. Okay, so this is the French Revolution, selling something through scantily clad young women. This is Pirelli, selling something through scantily clad young women. This is Edinburgh Skeptics. Selling something. New calendars are proposed all the time. There was quite a lot of them in the early 1900s. This is the world calendar, was popular in about the 30s. So popular, in fact, that the head of Kodak, the camera people, decided all his officers and all his staff would use only this calendar, and not the Gregorian one that the entire rest of the world and all his suppliers were using at the same time. Not too bright a move. It didn't last long. And it's got an extra day or 2 days every year, so the cycle of the week gets broken up. Perpetual calendars like this, they're quite handy in some ways. They tend to be a lot more mathematical, so they've got equal numbers of days in every month, something like that. Some of them weeks, so that you can keep the cycle of the week unbroken. And they're generally perpetual, so you've got the same date falling on the same day of the week every year, which is obviously not something we have at the moment. Plus points for me, it would make it a lot easier to schedule rallies throughout the year and other sporting events. On the downside, people would get less things printed, so I think on balance we can probably do without them. I work in a printers, by the way, is what that joke is. I encourage people to get more things printed. Right, interlude. This is where it might not work. I'm going to hopefully show you 2 short videos demonstrating the difference between maths and numerology. Okay? Here's the first video. Cross your fingers now. Okay, so that was the introduction to Fallout New Vegas. The guy gets shot by a sniper. Okay, this demonstrates, to me anyway, what it's like to solve a maths problem. You've got a queer outcome at the start of the operation, which is what you've got in maths. You know what you know at the start, you know what you want to know at the finish, and you work your way down. There's a logical train of thought in the operation that we saw there. There was a little mess, but not too much. And there's very little in the way of wasted effort. Okay? Now please contrast this with the next video, which represents attempting to solve something through numerology. Okay, so for those of you unfamiliar with farming equipment, that was a slurry tanker on the left hand side there, and the thing you saw coming out was slurry, which is a rather potent form of fertiliser. It's recycled fertiliser, basically, is what we're looking at. Now, let us consider what happened there. There was no clear outcome at the start of the operation. There was no train of thought whatsoever into what happened there. There was quite a lot of mess, and the vast majority of effort was wasted, if still hilarious. So, basically with maths, you've got a logical way through the entire problem, and you're using things that actually work. If it's numerology, you're just getting all the numbers associated with a certain thing, throwing them together, and then seeing what you've got at the end. And what you've got in the end was basically what came out of that tanker in the last video. Right, let's get to the crux. I've wasted enough time, so let's get to the crux of the Mayans were a long-lived civilization in Central America from about 2,000 years BC. We know exactly when it ended, because it ended because of something that none of them ever expected: the Spanish Inquisition. Spain basically conquered the land and destroyed the religion and all that sort of thing. It was a series of city-states. They occupied the bit of Central America. It's basically Belize and Guatemala and Yucatan Peninsula, Mexico. Just that bit there. And they were very good agriculturists. They understood the need for things like crop rotation long before we did in the old world, leaving fallow ground to let the nutrients get back into the soil. They invented drinking chocolate. Big thumbs up from me for that one. And they're also very good mathematicians. However, they kind of misused this. It was a lot of astrology, and a lot of numerology and that sort of thing. But they had a symbol for zero long before anyone in the old world had it, we think. It's hard to date some of their work exactly. This is possibly the best known Mayan. By best known, I mean the guy that you play in Civilization. He's probably great. And he was ruler of a city-state called Palenque for a good period of time, about 70 years or so. His mother ruled before him, which was very unusual. I think she sounds pretty strong-willed from what I've read about her. he took over and he made it prosper. He was a very, very expanded a lot, raised in stature, and you can see. I mean, obviously this is a picture from the game. Civilization. It's not a real photo, I'm afraid. You can see the cities in the jungle, and they clear the jungle out to build it. You can see these fantastic step pyramids. This would be a major temple, I would guess. Lesser ones there. This fantastic outfit here. You've got to catch the lady's eyes with that, son. I don't know how authentic that is. I suspect it's just artistic license with the game. It might not be. And yeah, it was. I mean, they were making these massive pyramids, and each city-state tended to be tied to its rulers. So if the ruling dynasty kind of died away, then the city-state would just fade away. People would go somewhere else. Very, very centralised. These are their numerals. They use base 20, a bit like the French, and you've got basically the dots go up to 4, and then 5 dots make a line. So it's very easy to keep track of. If they were writing numbers, they would have big to small going down the page, and it would sometimes usually be tilted 90 degrees like that if they were doing that on a monument or something like that. So it's a lot easier to count in than some of the things that we had at the same time. We would be using Roman numerals at that time, which are really hard to add and very hard to multiply. These are not much more difficult than the base 10 that we use at the moment. So they were a wee bit advanced there as well. They had 3 calendars. This is why it's slightly disconcerting when people say the Mayan calendar, because there wasn't just one of them, there was 3 that ran at the same time. Their main kind of civil one was called the Hab, and it had 18 months. These are the names here, and then 20 days in each month, which they numbered from 0 to 19, so they could use it just with one symbol, right? Just with one symbol, and then 5 unlucky days to make up to 365. So the French had like lucky days as their extra. These are the unlucky days. It's just a wee bit of something to notice there. Same length as the Egyptian calendar, which would have been about the same time. Is this a coincidence? Surely not. I mean, surely there was some kind of aliens that were communicating at the same time. Yes, it is a coincidence. Unfortunately, no conspiracy there. It's the closest full number to the length of the year. It's reasonably sensible for people to use it if they're not going to go for a leap year system. Mayans did have leap years. I'll come to that in a minute. They also had the Zwokin, which is how I'm going to try and pronounce it, which was the religious calendar. 260 days. It's not a set number of months, though. It's basically a cycle of 13 and a cycle of 20 that are going at the same time, and they kind of interweave, and that's how they give that's how they name their days. So we've got, why is it 260? There's no clear answer, but it's either astronomical, which is between the tropics. It might be in the period of time between the sun going south overhead and then north overhead again. Biological. Apparently 260 days is the average gestation period for a human, if you count it from the first missed period to birth. I don't think it's exactly 260, but I think it's close enough. Agricultural, it could have been the length of time from planting a crop to harvesting it, or some kind of numerological. We know that they like the number 20 and they like the number 13 a lot, so 13 times 20 is possibly just those two multiplied together. It gives unique names for the days, and I will show you that now. Basically how they named them was that they would have a name from the Hab calendar, so that would be pretty much as we would think of it. But when they were naming it from the Zwokin calendar, they would start by calling the first day 1 Imix. Can I just say, these pronunciations are probably all wrong, but I'm going to just go with it anyway. Then the next one would be 2 Ik, 3 Akbal, 4 Kan, and then so on, until you get to 13 Ben, and then after that the number would go back to 1, and then the name would carry on. So the next day after that one would be 1 X. And then that would go on, and eventually you'd get to, I think it would be 7 Abja, if I remember correctly, and then the number would go to 8, and the name would go back to the start. And because 13 and 20 are relatively prime, you would get 260 unique day names before it started repeating itself. So they would have a name from this calendar, a name from the Hab, and when you combine those together, you get what we call the calendar round. And basically, it took about 52 years, going all the way through, before the names started repeating, the combination between the two names. In case you haven't worked it out, that's 18,980 days. Which is an awful lot, but that's the number of unique names that they could get from this system. And most of the time that was fine. They didn't really ever need to refer to something more than 52 years in the past or more than 52 years in the future. So they would just give it what we call the calendar round name, and that would be enough. However, I said back at the start that Pakal reigned for about 70 years. So obviously if you were recording what a ruler had done, you needed a way of recording time that was longer than that. So what they did was they used this thing called the long count. This is where all the fun has come from this year. The long count is the total number of days since the day that they assumed that the world was created, which we'll go with this date for now. I'll talk a wee bit more about that in a minute. And this was basically 5 digits in a line going down the way, and it told you how many days it had been since this had happened. And these are the names down here. Mainly in 20s, but this one only went up to 18 and then it cycled on. Probably to keep this close to 365, make it a wee bit easier to count. And the apocalypse theory basically says that the Mayans believed that the world was cyclical and that we're currently on the 4th cycle, the first successful one. They believed that the previous cycle lasted 13 baptines before it ended. So that when that comes around, this world is going to end. And that is on the December 21st of this year. Hence, because of that, the Mayans are predicting that the world will end on that date. That's it. Okay, that's a theory there. And after my research, I can exclusively reveal exactly what is going to happen to us because of this theory. We are going to be inundated, overwhelmed, and utterly amazed by the largest amount of bollocks you've ever known in your life. Not a self-portrait, by the way. Problems with this theory. The first one is that is one of the creation myths, although it's not the only one, but it's the most common one. And we don't know really when it started. We're kind of guessing that it was the 11th of August, 3114 BC. That's the Gregorian calendar. But we're not entirely certain. It kind of fits in with a lot of evidence that we've got, that it may or may not be the actual date that they were counting from. And the biggie is, there is absolutely no evidence that they predicted that the Earth would end on that date. Nothing. Absolutely zero. There is one inscription mentioning it, I'll come into in a minute, that's got absolutely nothing to do with the apocalypse. And this is the main problem I had with this talk, because I thought, right, I'll go and have a look at this, I'll look at all the evidence, I'll be nice and sceptical about it, then I'll present it to the good folk in the Banshee. Well, I had to look for all the evidence, and then I realised I was about 45 minutes short for a talk, because there is literally nothing. There is not a single, I cannot emphasise to you enough how zero evidence there is. Anyway, where did it start from? Well, it started from this guy. And as you can probably tell by the glasses, he's American, and this is his name is Michael D. Cole, and he's American, as I said. He's a former CIA operative in Taiwan, where he launched operations against the Chinese mainland back in the 50s, and he wrote a book called The Maya in 1966. That's what he did, and he says this: there is a suggestion that Armageddon should overtake yada da 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 da. The first thing that strikes me about this quote is that he says there is a suggestion. Now that strikes me as basically a way of saying they say that, or a source told me that, and he has made it up, basically. The other thing that strikes me for this is when he says about the great cycle of the long count. The whole point of having the long count calendar, and the whole point it was invented in the first place, was that it wasn't a cycle, it was linear. And it doesn't go in blooming cycles if it's a straight line. Or it does, but it's infinitely long. So, what people have said about him. There's a theme runs through these quotes. See if you can spot it. There's nothing in the Maya or Aztec or ancient Mesoamerican prophecy suggest that it prophesies the sudden major change. completely modern invention. Okay. The Mayans and the Aztecs were in the same kind of part of the world. The Mayans were, as I say, in Yucatan Peninsula and that sort of thing. Aztecs were a wee bit further northwest, around about Mexico City. There was another group called the Olmecs, which I think were south, although they died out quite early. And they kind of shared the same calendar, and religions were variations on each other, kind of like Rome and Greece over here, religion-wise anyway. Here's another one. 2012 phenomenon. It's a complete fabrication and a chance for a lot of people to cash in. No record of knowledge that the Maya would think the world could come to an end in 2012. The Maya predicted the world would continue. We keep looking for endings. The Maya were looking for a guarantee nothing would change. It's an entirely different mindset. This is the one inscription on any Mayan relic or remains anywhere that mentions this date, 130000. So this is the date that we're being accused of the world ending on. And this is what it said. This is a translation. It may not be 100% accurate. It will be completed the 13th back turn. This is the calendar round date, so that's just showing that they know exactly when it is. And what happened is a display of this guy's a god, possibly a war god, and a great investure. Now, my theory, this is my pet theory for this one, is that the guys that have made this inscription have won a fight with someone. This is why they're calling on this war god here. And they're planning some kind of celebration afterwards. And what they're saying is, we're going to party like it's 130000. One of the reasons I think this is, you can probably just turn that off. One of the reasons I think this is, we know that they really like dates that ended in zero. So imagine, you know what it was like with us for the millennium, 2000, which technically isn't the millennium. But you know what it was like when, just because the year ended in a zero or 3 zeros, it was a big party. They would have went mental over this, 4 zeros in a row. They would have been drunk for days, or whatever it is, smoking things for days. And 13 was a holy number for them as well, so this would have been like, major. Basically what they're saying is, we've beaten these other guys, we've got such a big celebration, it'll be like it's this date. And there's a lot of evidence that, like, so when it got to 3 zeros in a row, which was every 20 years, they would redecorate their house, they would rebuild their house. This is true. I mean, this is what they would do. And when it was 5, 10 or 13, they would like do work to the house. There's a lot of inscriptions about this, which makes a lot more sense than things like grand designs. So, evidence that there wasn't a prediction that the world would end is that there's inscriptions that go beyond that date. The Mayans of Palenque, they figured out that the 80th calendar round anniversary of Pakal would be 8 days after the first time that we had to use the 6th digit, whose name I forget. And there would be a great double celebration in this year. The best one I like is, I think it's someone taking the mick, it's probably an ancient Mayan taking the mick somewhere, and they've inscribed this date here, which is 4 times 10 to the 28 AD. It's about 4 quintillion times the possible age of the universe. So I suspect they're taking the mick. Actually, what I suspect is some Mayan maths teacher has got really annoyed with his class and said, work out what day in the calendar round this is, you bastards. That's what I suspect. So I'm aware I'm running short of time because I've talked too much. So what might cause the end of the world? Magnetic pole shift is one theory that's been mentioned. No, that takes thousands of years. It does happen. Has happened in the past. We've evidence of it. Doesn't cause the end of the world. It takes about thousands of years to happen. It's not going to happen between now and December. Black hole coming near there. No, we would have evidence of it before now. It would be distorting everything all over the place. It would be blocking it. You'd got gravitational lensing from the light, starlight behind it. Not going to happen. Planetary occlusion. There's this thing called Nibiru, which is allegedly a planet in the solar system that hides behind the sun all the time. No, we would have seen it before now. Galactic alignment. Apparently the sun is going to line up with the equator of the galaxy, and that's going to cause something to happen. No, first of all, it doesn't get more than about 2 degrees away from it, and mainly that happened already in 1998, and it's actually moving away at the moment. There was this comet, Ewan Leeming, last year that people thought was going to cause the end of the world. Why? Because they thought it was a code word. The first 3 letters of it, E-L-E, if you've seen the film Deep Impact, this is true, it's true, this happened. If you've seen the film Deep Impact, you'll know that ELE stands for Extinction Level Event. So all the tinfoil hat brigades on the internet figured that was what this comic was going to be. The guy that invented it, Mr. Elliman, he didn't invent it, sorry, he discovered it. He had to spend about a month convincing people that it wasn't going to be the end of the world. It's just crazy. And then Google Sky. Google brought up the Google Sky, which is like a map of the night sky. And there was a bit in it that was blacked out. Now, the reason for this was because the telescope had failed when it was scanning that. The tinfoil hat brigade decided, no, they've redacted part of the night sky. Whereupon some people from Google pointed out that if you actually went outside and looked, it's not actually redacted at all. Perhaps it's not the end of the world, perhaps it's a new age of enlightenment. There's this thing called time wave zero that this guy invented when he was in the 60s and he was massive. And he basically took the date of the atomic bomb at Hiroshima and worked out from that that the end of the world was going to happen in November 2012. He then read up about the Mayans, decided he'd done his calculations wrong, and changed it to December rather, for the second Tuesday. Changed it to December for the second edition of his book, and he then sold more copies. Possibly something to do with it. Return of this Aztec god. Apparently he's coming back in December. Good luck to him. I'll add him to the list of gods that we're expecting to see. Galactic Creator have already. Sagittarius A star is not the most intelligent star with the best exam results in Sagittarius. It is in fact the black hole at the centre of the galaxy. Apparently the sun lines up with it in December. No, it doesn't. This is a mountain in the south of France. It's fantastic. Alison, you'll know about this. It's the Upside Down Mountain. By upside down, I don't mean like Terry Pratchett upside down. So the old rocks are on the top and the younger rocks are underneath because of the upthrust of the Pyrenees. And basically loads and loads of people have been going there because they reckon because of this magical alignment of the rocks, that's the place to ride out the apocalypse. So bad is it in fact, the village near it is about 600 people. They had 10,000 visitors one weekend. The mayor had to call out the army. This is a good one. There's no real reason for this, but I think it's quite funny. This is Pakal the Great. This is an inscription on top of his tomb, and apparently this shows him in a spaceship. This is meant to be the spaceship here. This is the rocket, you can't see it there, the rocket thrust. And he's apparently sitting in the exact same position that the early Mercury and Gemini astronauts sat in the American space program. To me, I think he's just sitting on his throne, and then there's all kinds of stuff happening up here. I don't know if
the tree of life. It's a Mayan tree.
Tree of life, is it?
It's meant to be the tree. It sort of reaches up into space and it connects the Earth into the sky. Because they had this thing about trees.
Oh, okay, I'll give them the tree rocket note. Mayan astrology, I don't have time to talk about it. I had that saved up. Might the world end anyway? Right, this is desperate clutching at straws time as I try and give equal time to the other point of view. The Earth is closer to the Sun in December. We've got less time to react if there's a solar flare, perhaps. We're moving faster in our orbit, so there's more chance of hitting something. That could cause the world to end. Most of the northern hemisphere would be in winter. Most of the world's atomic weapons are housed in the northern hemisphere. If any of our leaders had seasonal affective disorder, that might cause the end of the world. Political instability. We live in interesting times. There is a big chance, at least, that a far-right religious fundamentalist might take over some country between now and then. On the other hand, Obama might win. That's the one dig I'm allowing myself. So, conclusion. Did the Mayans predict the end of the world in any way, shape or form? No. Why do we hear so much about it then? Because some people are idiots and other people like making money out of it. Will the world end in December? Yes. It will for some people. People die all the time. And it could... This is the serious bit. People die all the time, and it could well be that if you lose a child or your partner or something like that, you'd feel like the world was ending. You might even get whole families wiped out, or whole kind of areas, and it would be the end of the world for that. But all of us, no. We're hard to kill. There's a lot of stuff that could happen, but it's all very, very, very unlikely. The world's not going to end in December, there's no point thinking it is. Thank you to these people and things for allowing me to talk here tonight. And at the risk of ending on a downer, here's Twist again. Thank you.